Hey everybody, welcome back to Video. So, continuing series on MARS FPGA, more specifically what they're previewing for what consoles and arcade boards, and what they've been showing off on Twitter, because in the last month or so, MARS got a little bit quiet, but recently they've been previewing a lot more stuff, a new case design, and a lot of other games that I've talked about on previous videos. But today we're going to be focusing on Dreamcast and a few other arcade games they have been showing over on their Twitter, because pretty much everyone and their uncle contacted me and asked me if I had seen this, and of course I already have. Before I get too far involved, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But the first thing that MARS FPGA teased again on their Twitter is going to be Sonic Adventure 2. And you'll see if we go over to their Twitter page, you can see that it is running. I got a lot of questions asking if I knew whether or not this was running on MARS FPGA. It is definitely not. They stated as much in the comments, and I'll go over those in just a moment. And obviously one of the first things that MARS previewed for the actual project is going to be a Dreamcast and NAOMI core. They've said it's going to be both, and there is evidence again of them retweeting that. So the question is, when can we expect to see something actually running on MARS for Dreamcast and NAOMI? Because I would say 99 out of 100 people that are remotely interested in the MARS project want to see evidence of this actually running. This seems to be the #1 platform that people are interested in. And don't get me wrong, I love Dreamcast and NAOMI. I own a lot of hardware and games for both, so I would be curious to see. Now granted, Dreamcast is not an expensive console, and getting an optical disc emulator isn't that hard either. But NAOMI is a completely different story, and it can be a metric pain in the butt to set up, if I'm being honest with you. So the idea of a NAOMI FPGA core would be something interesting to me as well. But I mean, Dreamcast was obviously one of Sega's most popular consoles, and it is lighter weight than something like PlayStation 2, Xbox, or GameCube, so it is something that seems to be achievable on an FPGA device. Whether or not it's MARS, we'll have to wait and see. But they did say right here, this is a DC digital capture, so this footage is not running on any sort of MARS FPGA platform. It's very similar to using the RetroTink and either going HDMI in with a digital mod or something like VGA. So they are showing off real footage running on a real Dreamcast just with an HDMI mod out of the back. And we've gone over the hardware pretty extensively in the past, but honestly it would be interesting to see how this can shape up, because a lot of people own Dreamcasts, a lot of people have them, and what you need to do is get that Hitachi SH4 core running alongside the Power VR unit. And don't get me wrong, that is not a light lift. This is complex hardware. It's beyond what you see for Nintendo 64 on the MiSTer FPGA side of things as far as the silicon complexity. But people are asking, will this happen on FPGA? And they're saying yes, Dreamcast and NAOMI. They're saying that they're doing both, and that is what people I think are really wondering when you're going to actually see that running on the hardware. A lot of people have asked me about the NAOMI. It is hardware that I own multiple versions of, NAOMI and NAOMI 2, but do be aware that MARS has not mentioned anything about NAOMI 2, just the base NAOMI. They are different platforms, even though they share a lot of the similar hardware. NAOMI 2 is much more powerful, and don't forget, NAOMI does come in GD-ROM as well as the cartridge formats. That's two different formats you have to get running on something like a MARS FPGA chip in the future. Granted, the GD-ROM format for NAOMI is basically identical to Dreamcast, so it should kind of come part and parcel there. Now, one thing that I haven't heard anything mentioned of, and I would be curious personally, is how they're going to implement stuff like JVS over onto the MARS side of things, because NAOMI runs on JVS, it is not JAMA, so it is a different control standard that would have to be stood up on any FPGA project. And for every game that just uses something like an arcade stick and buttons or analog steering and controls, there are a lot of awesome light gun games on something like NAOMI as well. And those would be the ones that I'd be most curious to see come over to an FPGA core, because trust me, setting up a NAOMI with light guns, it's a lot of cables, it drives me nuts, and I don't play my games near as often because of that. But honestly, I do sometimes use something like the Gun for IR, which does great on NAOMI emulation, and JB, the maker of this, is apparently assisting the MARS team sometime in the future to get this implemented as well. But I'm curious to know about CRT support, because honestly, I love playing my light gun games on a CRT alongside my LCD, so that's information I would want to know. But it'll be interesting to hear details about NAOMI in the future on a potential FPGA core, because as similar as it is to Dreamcast, it does have some differences. It has different BIOS files, it has different hardware in some small respects, so it will be kind of interesting to see how they do that. And like I said, again, there's two different formats for NAOMI, the GD-ROM as well as the ROM boards themselves. and this is where NAOMI gets to be a real pain in the ass to set up. If you have to do the GD-ROM or NetBoot, the amount of cables you're dealing with is basically something you could get yourself tangled in. It's not something you want to run outside of a cabinet. And speaking of things running, when they talk about showing the hardware off at too many games, I would say based on comments from what I'm hearing, people really want to see something like Dreamcast running. This is where the interest lies in MARS for people that I talk to, and granted I do love late 80s and early 90s arcade games probably more than most of my viewership, but those previews aren't really anything that MiSTer FPGA couldn't handle at this point in time, where something like Dreamcast has been researched and we know that it can't be done on MiSTer. So I think when people think about MARS and what it could show in the future, they really want to start seeing stuff like Dreamcast running on it. Granted, there's also a 3DO core in the works, and that would be fun to see for me personally, but I know the interest level lies in the Dreamcast. But let's take a look at some of the other previews they've shown since I did the last video. Super Space Fortress Macross here, another Tate or vertical shmup, one that I think most people probably aren't going to be aware of the existence of. Banpresto released a lot of arcade games, but when I hear people talk about arcade shmups and arcade games in general, outside of Sailor Moon, I don't really hear Banpresto's name mentioned all that much. And as we go over to footage of the game running via emulation, it's not a board I have in my collection personally. It is an interesting game, it is fun, but again, I don't think it's living up obviously to the level of something like Dreamcast. And I know people really love console cores because it doesn't just give you one game, it gives you the entire library of games, but something like Macross would be fun to play on an FPGA device. I'd probably put it in the B- tier of shmups for me personally, but leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think. And tell me what the one thing you want to see running in July when the MARS team apparently shows off this hardware is. I'm expecting a lot of Dreamcast responses, and that would make total sense. But Macross here is a fun shmup, it's a competent time, and obviously if you're a fan of the property, you're probably going to get more out of it than I would, just because Macross for me really isn't something that I am super into. But the MARS team has previewed a bunch of other games, and I'm curious to know which one of these you've actually heard of before. If we go over here, there's another tweet with another preview, and again, outside of them telling us the Dreamcast footage is running on a DC digital, we don't know what this is. It could be emulation, it could be a hardware capture, we're not really quite sure, but Go Mile Smile here is a fun game that kind of takes the idea of Pac-Man and marries it to Snake, the game you used to play on your cell phones back in the day. It's colorful, it's unique, it's challenging, and again, it's probably one that I'm assuming most people aren't actually familiar with. And I want to know down below, again, tell me if you know this game, if you've ever played it. I'm always curious what your guys' experience with titles like this is, because for every game they show something like Sonic Adventure 2 running on Dreamcast, there's also a Go Mile Smile, and that isn't going to be a smaller core, and maybe not the type of thing that's going to be a system seller. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the game. I'm just kind of presuming here. Now let's take a look at Blackheart, another game that they teased over on their Twitter, and it seems like it's a very shmup heavy teaser week for MARS this week, outside of that Dreamcast Sonic Adventure 2 footage, and I totally get that. Shmups are one of the most iconic arcade genres, but again, this is one that I'm assuming most people have never heard of. I probably played this like 5 or 6 years ago in an arcade, and I'm checking it out here via MAME, and it definitely has some Cho Iniki vibes to me, definitely not rising to the level of weirdness of something like Cho Iniki or I Cho Iniki, but it does give me that same sensation every once in a while. And this is another one I'd be curious to know how many of you know about it and how many of you are finding out about it for the first time here. If this is what they end up previewing at Too Many Games in July, I think people will be intrigued by it, but not as exciting as seeing something like Dreamcast or NAOMI potentially run on the core. And right here, this is pretty hilarious. So you have this gigantic elephant trout ship being run around by minotaurs with what looks like a playing card king in the front. They've also shown off Macross 2, which compared to the first one being a Tate shmup, this is going to be a horizontal one, and I would say definitely not as much fun as the original Macross that we just showed about a minute and a half ago in the video. But it's another title that MARS has teased on Twitter, so it's another one that we should assume is coming to the platform, because I don't think anyone thinks that MARS is just putting up videos of their favorite games of all time, and that these aren't actually going to be coming to the hardware. But without any sort of statement, we really don't know what this thing could potentially launch with. We don't know a launch date. The only thing we know is they're still working on it, and the price point still seems to be $700, but honestly, all of that is subject to change. You have to wait for an announcement to find out what's going on. And again, don't really think this is a system seller, but it is another intriguing idea. But that's what MARS is currently teasing. It's been very Dreamcast and NAOMI heavy. They are stating that they are using the footage from a Dreamcast with a DC digital mod, and they really haven't shown anything on the NAOMI front whatsoever. But next time MARS previews more, if it's worth a video, I will definitely make another one. Leave me any questions or comments down below. below. I would be curious to hear what you guys think about this and what you want to see come July when this hardware apparently gets previewed. But short of that, we are done. That's the updates on Mars, and I will see you guys next time that they update some more stuff. Bye-bye.